From classrooms and communities to diplomacy and retirement enclaves, China's presence in Southeast Asia has never been more layered. A 2025 survey by the IC's Yusof Ishak Institute found that the US has now dislodged China as the region's top choice if countries were forced to take a side. Yet, that same survey points to China's slowly but steadily rising soft power across the region. In our second part look at CNA's China Power series, we speak with our correspondents who have travelled all across Southeast Asia to explore how that influence is being felt and what it means for the future. So I have all my digital colleagues in the studio with me. They are Lee Kim Siong, Bong Ying, and Melody Chan. Welcome, all of you. Nice to have the company. Kim Siong, if we could start with you first. You were recently in Bắc Ninh. Now, for our viewers, that's a northern province of Vietnam. And you were meeting with members of all kinds of ethnic communities there, Chinese communities. What were you hoping to understand from your visit, and why this particular group? Why were they so important to talk to?
Right. So the survey, as mentioned, found that China is still seen as the most influential power in Southeast Asia, both in economic and strategic terms. So I wanted to find out how Chinese ethnic communities there are making sense of all this, how they are balancing nationality and with their cultural roots, at a time when China's influence is growing in the region. So that brought me to Bắc Ninh. That's a province that's just an hour away from Hanoi, the capital of Vietnam. Now, to understand why Bắc Ninh matters, it helps to know where it came from. A little more than a decade ago, it was a largely rural province, dependent on agriculture.
Yep.
But today, it's a very different story. It's now a vibrant industrial hub, thanks to a steady stream of foreign investments, much of it from China. So I was particularly interested in how the ethnic Chinese community in Bắc Ninh sees all this. How do they feel about the growing presence of Chinese businesses and expats in their own backyard? So this question is especially meaningful given the history. In the late 1970s, during a period of heightened tensions between Vietnam and China, many ethnic Chinese in the north had to leave. So some of them moved to the south, to Ho Chi Minh City. Some other left Vietnam altogether, back to their ancestral homes in China. So in many ways, this trip was about revisiting history and understanding how communities are responding to the changes unfolding around them.
Now, Bong, you also have been reporting, but on a different group, Chinese students in particular across Southeast Asia, and how their growing presence is shifting perceptions on the ground. I'm curious as to what drew you to this particular story about students, and what did you find when you talked to them?
Jill, for many years, the US and the UK, those were the top choices for Chinese students. But Southeast Asia is rising as one of the top, or as one of the first choice because of visa restrictions, rising anti-China rhetoric, and also safety fears in the West. I spoke to several Chinese students in the region, and they all wanted stability, they wanted certainty, and not just for education, but for their futures as well. And Malaysia has seen one of the sharpest increases. It's a five-fold increase, in fact, from 2020 to 2024. And cost is a big part of it. One year's worth of tuition in Malaysia can be $5,000 US, compared to $30,000 to $40,000 US in the US and the UK itself. But cost aside, one student who is doing his PhD at University in Malaya said that Malaysia is a place where he can learn from different cultures and not feel like an outsider. And Thailand is also drawing in a lot of Chinese students. One student I spoke to who came from An Hue and is now studying in Kanchanaburi told me that she's not confident about surviving China's hyper-competitive system, and so she wanted something more balanced. And also across these, the factors were different, cost, culture, quality of education, but the theme was the same, which is safety, trust, and a sense of belonging. For example, I spoke to one SMU student who came from Wuhan, and she told me that Singapore is a place where she can truly see her future in, and she rejected scholarship offers from top institutions in the US and the UK just to come to Singapore.
Well, that is really impressive, and it speaks volumes, doesn't it? Melody, building on that point about international students in the region, you've been reporting from Chiang Mai. Now, that's a city that's seeing a growing number of another interesting group, Chinese retirees. Now, what brought you there and what stood out to you during your visit?
Yes, Jill. So we are seeing China power not only through, the hard power. Yeah. Its influence is also coming through some soft and also everyday ways. So Chiang Mai, it's one of the most popular city for Chinese retirees in Thailand. And Thailand is also one of the only 5 ASEAN countries that offers retirement visa. So that's why that brought me to Chiang Mai. And I've been speaking to a lot of retirees there, and they told me that their pensions actually go further. They're able to afford a bigger home. They enjoy good health care, and also they like the weather there, the climate is more constant. And we realize not all the retirees from China likes to stay full-time in that country. Some of them will choose, and they adopt a term called the migratory bird style retirement, which means during the colder winter season, they will fly off to Thailand, spend weeks or months in a resort enjoying swimming, golf, and only returning when the weather gets warmer. So all this kind of trends is actually increasing some economic activities in the country, bringing more jobs, local spending, and also more business opportunities. Of course, there are trade-offs. You see, the property prices might rise because of the increased demand, and there's also heightened competitions between the locals and the migrants. So it's a mixed picture, but overall, we are seeing that the perception for China is also affected by the everyday choices of the people there.
Interesting, Melody. Kim Siong, and this is for all of you here, but let's start with you. What Melody talked about the trade-offs, right? There's good and bad. China's influence, listening to you, no doubt, shaping everyday life in all these places that we've been talking about. But how is it being perceived? More of an opportunity, or are there some deeper concerns?
Right, as I mentioned earlier, there are very few ethnic Chinese left in northern Vietnam now, after many left in the late 1970s. But we did manage to speak with several. Interestingly, some had moved there from other provinces in search of jobs and opportunities. You could say it's a kind of reverse migration. So I spoke with this restaurant owner. Her name is Nicole from Ho Chi Minh City. She's now operating a restaurant at a supermarket in Bac Ninh. She's ethnic Chinese Vietnamese and fluent in Mandarin, thanks to her father who pushed her to learn it outside of school. That effort is now paying off. Her businesses mainly serve Chinese expats now working in Bac Ninh. Another example is this hotel staff whom I spoke with. She told me she's earning about 30% more now compared to when she was back in her own village, where jobs are still mostly in farming and handicrafts. And there are challenges too. For example, Nicole says competition from Chinese businesses is intense. They have better supply chains, stronger networks, and they offer higher salaries. So it's making it harder for local businesses to keep up. There are also growing concerns over housing prices and the rise in nightlife and entertainment venues, it being a hub for foreign investments. So some people fear that these are not properly regulated. So overall views are mixed. Some welcome the change, others are more cautious. And we are seeing a similar pattern in other areas. Take Bong's story on Chinese students overseas. We wonder if they know that their presence is also shaping how locals view China. And Bong's been looking into that, and she can share more.
Yes, Jill. So actually, most of the Chinese students don't see it that way. They don't see it as they are bringing some form of influence to Southeast Asia or wherever they are based in. But an analyst I spoke to noted that the presence of Chinese students in Southeast Asia helps to humanize China. Their daily interactions with their roommates, their classmates, their professors, they all help soften China's image. But these are just individual efforts, and they are not part of a state-driven coordinated strategy. So we have to be careful there to not overstate their influence. And geopolitical alignments aren't just going to shift because of educational exchanges. But I must also add that the student exchange is not just one way. More Southeast Asians are also heading to China to study, to live, and they're seeing a China that is more complex and more human than what the headlines often suggest. One Singapore student at Peking University told me that she wanted to step out of her comfort zone and emerge effectively bilingual. And she also said that she was amazed at how open her Chinese classmates are and that they are very curious about where she's coming from. And then there's another student who I spoke to who is currently studying at Zhejiang University in Hangzhou, and she described how the online negativity about China didn't really match her reality on the ground, and that people from strangers to the cleaners are really kind to her. So this two-way exchange, they are not state-led diplomacy, but they are still very powerful in that sense. But the sentiment is also mixed because in most places, Chinese students are welcome. They bring spending power and they enrich the cultural landscape. But there's also questions about whether they are integrating enough and whether their growing numbers will make it harder for local students to access the resources as well. And Madeline, I imagine that retirees are facing a different but also a complex and dynamic situation.
Yeah, it's definitely a different dynamic, but also equally layered. So we heard a lot about positive things. For example, there's this place called Hangdong. It is a district in Chiang Mai that is very popular amongst the Chinese retirees there. So around the area, there are cafes, stores, and a lot of them reported that there's a small business boom because of these newcomers around the area. Maybe we can hear from what one of them has to say.
เปลี่ยนไปเยอะร้านเพิ่มขึ้นร้านแบบพวกร้านกาแฟแล้วอะไรขึ้นเยอะเลยค่ะ2 ปีประมาณ2 ปีมาเนี่ยค่ะถนนเส้นนี้แบบคึกคักเยอะขึ้นเลยมากกว่า 50% เกิน 50% เลย
Right, and as I mentioned earlier, there's positive, but there are also some trade-offs.
Yeah.
So some of them are telling me that, the property prices are rising. Experts are saying that the healthcare system in Thailand simply isn't built to cater if there's a large influx of foreign migrants that will depend on the system. So that might have some problems down the road if it's not planned out for. Other than that, on the property sector, for Thailand, they have a law that actually caps the condominium ownership to 49% for foreigners. But some Chinese nationals were reported to be found circumventing the law by hiring some of the, they call it the Thai nominees to hold the properties for them. So that's creating some issues. And elsewhere in Philippines, last year, there has been a case where 4 Chinese nationals were reported to be linked to organized crime, and they were there using the retirement visas. And when the officials looked deeper, they found out that there are 30,000 more other Chinese nationals using the retirement visa, but they are actually under the minimum age requirement. The age is 50, but they're mostly from 35 to 50. Yeah. So that's raising a security issue. So some of the lawmakers are calling for tighter restrictions on the visas as well.
All right, interesting. I guess the jury is still out, and the presence of Chinese in this region is still clearly an evolving question. So where does that leave China's influence heading to next? And what should we in Southeast Asian countries be watching out for, Melody?
Right. I think it's firstly important for us to note that the survey, the ISIS survey that all our stories are based on, were actually conducted between the period of 3rd January to 15th February. So that's before a lot of major events took place, example, the recent rounds of tariffs from the US. And also because I attended the webinar where they released the survey results. So it happens to coincide with US Liberation Day. So a lot of the panelists were telling us that if the survey is conducted today, we might see a very different result. So we can take note of that. And coming back from the topic that I was focusing on retirement, I think looking forward, we might see a continued trend of more retirees, Chinese retirees coming to the slower paced cities like Penang, Chiang Mai, and they might even go to countries like Indonesia where the visa policy is beginning to ease. The trend is going to be like that, but if we want to see a win-win situation, it will all depend on how it's managed, how the retirees are integrating, how the locals are accepting them, and also how the local governments are sort of prepared for this. So, but ultimately, how China is perceived on the ground will all depend on, how this everyday choices that people are making.
Absolutely. And Bong, how do you see this unfolding, and what should Southeast Asia look out for?
I think looking ahead, the number of Chinese students in Southeast Asia is likely to grow.
Yeah.
And we also know that China is becoming more deliberate in its Trump offensive in the region, and that's highlighted in President Xi Jinping's recent Southeast Asia tour. But sustaining the momentum will depend on how both sides adapt, how China adapts and how us in the region adapt. And while top-tier institutions such as National University of Singapore and also University of Malaya are widely respected, degrees from lesser-known schools in the region, they still face a credibility gap in China. So I'll expect that schools in Southeast Asia, they will be in for a learning process. There will be some growing pains and bumps along the road. But that's the kind of transactional cost for recruiting international students in.
Right. Kim Siong, if you could answer that same question, but quickly.
Yeah, so China's presence in the region is evolving. It's bound to have implications not just on the economy, but also on government decisions. So when I was in Vietnam, one of the top concerns is market saturation and competition for businesses. They are worried that they'll be priced out by larger firms who have stronger networks and deeper pockets. They have raised this concern to the government, and they have assured that they will do something about it. They will step in to ensure fair competition if needed. Yeah.
Great discussion, and like you said, a fantastic insight into the snapshot. We should do another one now, as Melody suggested. So come back and speak with us then. So presence, perception, persuasion, and complexity. Well, we want to thank our CNA correspondents Lee Kim Siong, Bong Ying, and Melody Chan for their reporting and all their insights. And you can also read the full 8-part series on our website, that's cna.asia.